Oh, is it going? Look, hi. Every time the stream starts, I don't know that. I don't understand streaming. It's very confusing. But apparently, it's happening. So, very good. I'm trying to live stream some tarot and make some videos so that people who are interested can learn about it. And today I have a bunch of things I want to talk about. So we'll either do one long one or we'll split them up into different pieces. But one of the things I wanted to start with first is talking about the suits. This is really basic. If you're familiar with tarot cards, then you are probably going to be really aware of what most of this stuff is. So the first thing I like to do is remind everyone that I am using the deck designed by Pamela Coleman Smith, which is referred to as the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. And this is the box for it, for the big boy. And I typically read with this little small one. But in order to do some streaming, I thought we would use the big ones because they're a lot easier to see. So a lot of people know that tarot is used as a way of divination. It's typically used to try to tell the future or to get clarity on things that you're thinking about. I'm really into the Carl Jung version of how tarot cards work, talking about the archetypes, especially as they relate to the 22 major arcana. But I wanted to talk about something in the minor arcana today, which are the suits, specifically how the aces look and how they work, and talk about the different suits within them. So the cards are made up of 78 cards total. 22 of those are major arcana, which you're probably familiar with. You've probably seen like the Empress. She's a very lovely card that people have seen before, or the Chariot, or the Devil, or the Sun, things like that. So these are major arcana, and usually when you get one of those, that's something that you should really pay attention to. It's a big deal. It's something that has a lot of implications. And I think that a lot of them are very easy to read, even if you're not particularly experienced. What sometimes people have a harder time with are the minor arcana suits within the deck. And those make up 56 cards within the deck. And they're pretty important, I think, for getting guidance with things, especially in your day-to-day life. So let's talk about them a little bit. I'm not going to go deeply into everything, but I feel that if we'll start diving into the Madmen side of things, which I wanted to talk about, then we should make sure that there's at least a foundational understanding of the suits, the four main suits. So there's swords, pentacles, wands, cups. In this deck and in many decks, they're labeled, so you don't have to guess at what they are. Sometimes you will find that instead of pentacles, you have a suit of discs, and sometimes instead of wands, you'll have a suit of staves. Tarot cards were invented sort of in the Renaissance in Italy, and then started going into France. So generally when you're looking at an English language tarot card deck, it was translated from Italian or French. This deck is originally from England. It was made in the late 1800s. Arthur Edward Waite directed it. Pamela Coleman Smith drew it. But it's very easy to kind of understand what the meanings are here. So each one of these is associated with one of the elements from alchemy or from occultism, and it's pretty easy to guess which element they all might be associated with. So what might the cups be associated with? Water. Wands, fire. Pentacles, that's a little bit harder. There's only two left. Earth. And swords are air. And so that sort of is an indicator of the realm that that particular suit has dominion over. Within the suit, there's an ace, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Typically a page, a knight, a queen, and a king. In some decks, those are replaced with a daughter or son, a father or mother, prince or princess, depending on how the deck is. In the Rider-Waite, it's page, knight, queen, king. And you can sort of think of those court cards as embodying different levels of the main focus of each of the suits. So let's go through that. The swords, their element is air. And so they have a lot to do with things like the academic mind, thought, conscious thought, decision making, academic thought, things that are very much in the real realm of intellect. And so the aces will typically have the beginning of those sorts of things. And I'll come back to what the aces mean overall once we get through each of the suits. Pentacles, they're with the element of earth. And pentacles, maybe you could guess what this might be. It sort of looks like money or gold or coins. And a lot of times pentacles are represented by some kind of money. The discs as well in other suits are sort of monetary representations, but they're not only money. You should also think of them as material wealth, physical wealth and health, things that are of value, physical value, things that can be traded, things that are heirlooms or valuable or have some kind of real physical value of property, money, currency, things like that. And so the element for pentacles is earth because it is grounded, it is earthly, it is base. And so that's the dominion that pentacles have. Wands are really, I love wands. I think they're very cool. A wand is representative, you can tell here, of fire. That's the element that goes with wands. And the thing about wands is they deal with the intuition and the spirit. So you can think of fire, spirit, spark, the thing that pushes you and motivates you. What just happened? Oh, small technical difficulty. Sorry about that. And the other thing that I like about the wands is that when you think of a large piece of wood this way, it can be so versatile. So it might be a walking stick, it might be a torch, it might be a weapon, it might be something to build with or to hold up a roof or to hold up a hoppy to get married under, which we do have presented sort of in one of the cards in the Four of Wands. I think that wands are really interesting because they have that spiritual aspect to them and they have a grounded aspect to them at the same time. So they have this sort of element of other cards like the swords and the pentacles kind of within the wands. And then finally cups, which I think is probably the easiest element to associate, which is water. Cups have to do with the spiritual, the emotional, the intuition. Cups are typically dealing with things that are in between the real world, consciousness and unconsciousness, the real world and the spirit world. The cups typically have a divine intuition aspect to them. And so let's go through that one more time, kind of try to guess along with me as I go over them. So swords, their element is air. You can think of it as slicing through the air, cutting through the air. They deal with decisions and they deal with academic intellectual thought. Pentacles, they are earth and they usually deal with money or physical property or something of value. Wands typically associate with the spirit because they're on fire, they're a spark. And then Ace of Cups, they're filled with water that can quench that fire, right? So if we have this spiritual spark in our wands, we can use the Ace of Cups to kind of go to the next level by putting out that fire and becoming spiritual. So they're all interconnected. The aces have their own place, and we'll talk about that in another video, but I wanted to go over the suits and I wanted to kind of, say intellectual, physical, spiritual, and then emotional. So water, fire, earth, air, those are the suits. And then we have within the suits 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then page, knight, queen, king. So that's the minor arcana, which is really, really complex in terms of interpretation. There's so many different ways to go with it, and I wanted to talk about these. Something I've talked about before and that I want to talk about again are the clouds. I work in technology and secure the cloud. So talking about the clouds is a little funny to me, but when you take a look at these, you can see that all of them have this cloud and then a hand coming out of the cloud. And there are lots of cloud images within this deck designed by Pamela Coleman Smith. The cloud typically in these cards is going to represent a sort of the concept of being from God or from the spirit world or from a universal consciousness. If you're familiar with the story about manna from heaven, which kept the Israelites fed when they were in the desert because it was directly from God, that's sort of what this is. It's direct from heaven. It's being given to you out of the ether, out of nothingness, out of the world around you, not because of any human intervention, but because the universe has decided to present that to you. And so when you have this hand coming out of the clouds, that's an indicator that this is divinely inspired in terms of the symbolism of the cards. So all of that leads us to the two cards that I wanted to talk about, which are these two cups cards. And the first one that I want to talk about is the Four of Cups. So I'm going to bring that one onto the camera so we can look at it and talk about it. So this is the Four of Cups, and I was talking to someone the other day about this and said, yeah, it's like Don Draper. And I think that's a really good way to remember this card if you ever watch the show Mad Men, especially the end of the show, the latest season, the last season. I can't remember what number it was, 6 or 7 or something. Don Draper is very much a man-child. He's very unevolved. Over the show, I think that he's very much an anti-hero. If you find yourself sort of rooting for Don Draper, you might want to examine why that would be. He's terrible. Although, you know, you want to see people succeed sometimes. And I think that this card is such a great example of that. In the end of Mad Men, at the end of last season, he sort of runs away to California. This guy loves to run away from his problems. And he goes to, I believe, Big Sur, to a place that is much like the Esalen Institute in the 70s. So I think the show ends in 1972, and that was 1971 or so that he's goes to Big Sur. And so to me, this is just such a Don Draper card because let's talk about the symbolism here. First, again, it's Four of Cups, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have our cloud hand, the hand coming out of the cloud offering something from divine inspiration. But look at this Don Draper guy's face. He's really pouty. He's sulking. He's not having it. He's being arrogant, sort of, and down on himself and down on everything around him. And he's being offered something from the universe, but he's pouting about it. And whenever we see cups that are upright, in the Rider-Waite deck and in most decks, you'll have cups that are upright and cups that are overturned. Cups that are overturned typically represent something that you have lost, something that has failed, something that's been painful, something that's hurt you. It's a spilling of emotion because remember we talked about cups being focused on the emotional. So if you see a turned over cup, there's a lot of symbolism there that you can think about. In this case, there are 3 cups that are upright on the ground. So they're grounded, literally, and that means that they're solid. You can count on them, that those cups are there for you. They're full of something because they're upright. And then we have this cup being offered out of the divine consciousness. We have this cup being given to us. Maybe it's full of wine, maybe it's full of water, maybe it's full of anything that could help you. It's being offered to you. But this guy is not really very pleased with it. And so the other thing you can think about is when you see this tree, it's coming directly out of his spine, essentially. It's lined up to be directly behind Don Draper's pouty little back. And you can also see the way that he's sitting. He's got his arms crossed and he's pouting as Don Draper, only Don Draper can. But the way he's sitting and the way his trunk of his body is rooted against the trunk of the tree, you can see that there's a connection between heaven and earth. And that's kind of a big symbolism of this card, is that we are of both heaven and earth. We are of the ground and we are of the spirit. And so that's a big part of the symbolism of this card. And also he's aligned himself with that tree. So it's an indicator of growth, or an indicator that there needs to be growth. And this tree is not particularly full. You'll see in some of the other trees on other cards that they're really big and lush. There's a lot of lush greenery. This one is kind of new. So it's not a big, huge, sturdy tree. It's at the beginning. And so if you're working with this, with tarot cards, and you get this card, if you get the Four of Cups, let's talk about what it should mean for us. So we don't know what the question is, but in general, when we get a card like this, we want to say to the person who drew it, what are you not thankful for? What do you have that you should be appreciating more? What are you not being grateful for? What's being offered to you by the universe that you should be taking advantage of? Your head is looking down. Your eyes are down, but you should be looking up at what's in front of you. You're dissatisfied, as Don Draper always was, with getting what you want. A lot of times this card is indicating that someone has worked or put effort forth or been emotionally tied to something. They've gotten that thing and they're still not happy. I think that if you either have seen Madmen or you know this card, then you could do the other one too, right? So it's very much a card of someone who is being childish and petulant and is not appreciating the things that are in front of them, and is also not recognizing the gifts that the universe is offering them, and has maybe achieved quite a lot, but is dissatisfied with the things that they have achieved. And I think that that's an indicator. Just about every tarot card you could possibly pull has an interpretation toward guidance, has an interpretation toward advice, which is why I like them. And this advice really is about, oh my God, would you please pay attention to the things that you have? Would you stop being a pouty little baby? You got what you wanted, but it wasn't right. Maybe you should have wanted something different. Maybe you should appreciate the things that you did get. Maybe you should think more about what the hell you're doing. It really comes with a warning that you need to wake up and stop being a child. So when you get this card, the Four of Cups, start kind of thinking about what you know about Don Draper. And if the person that pulled this card, the person, the querent asking the questions, if they pull this card, say, you know, it's time to evolve. It's time to grow up like the tree. It's time to root yourself to the ground and connect yourself to the higher spirit and see what you can do with what's coming at you from the universe that's been given to you without you even asking for it, you freaking baby. You don't have to be that harsh. It depends on what they're asking. So let's talk about another Cups card, which is one that I love because there's so much going on here. So this is the Seven of Cups, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 cups, and we have our guy here who's really fancy. And a lot of times when you see a card that the back is turned to us, the viewer, there's an indication that the viewer should sort of see themselves in the card. And what do we have here? We have so much cloud. So much cloud. So these, again, are cups being offered by the universe. So you should pay attention because the divine is offering you something. So in this particular instance, these cups are full of things. And this guy is checking them out and he's like, wow, what are all of these things in these cups? Let's go through each of them. And as I've said before, cups come with guidance. They come with, or excuse me, cards come with guidance. They come with advice. And because of that, a lot of times there are 2 ways to read every card or more. But usually there's sort of a pro and con, or guidance and advice, warning, positive and negative. So when you get this Seven of Cups card, there are a couple of things to look at. And I think that this is one of the more complicated cards to read because there's so much going on. And a lot of times people get a little bit lost in the weeds in the minor arcana. Personally, I urge you to practice a ton and learn your cards so that you can do both interpretive and intuitive reading. I can do another video on interpretive versus intuitive, but you want to know the meanings of the cards so that you can clear your mind to sort of be a bit of a medium. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? It's not. I'll show you how. So let's start with the first cup here. It has a lady's head with this awesome blue hair. They didn't change her hair color because she's sort of an idealized spirit, like a hologram. Remember when they did that hologram of Tupac? It's like that. So she is sort of a divine ideal of youth and beauty and, what you could be, an idealized self in a way. And also the warning here is that while you can have this youth and beauty, you can't let it become your entire identity, and you need to have more than that. So it's talking about not getting vain or arrogant or being lost in what you have physically. So the next one you can probably guess. It's a person with a shroud, and they've got this red radiant light coming out of them. So in most schools of occult thought and in most tarot decks, something that looks like this would definitely have to do with the divine spirit and the divine mysteries because it's shrouded. That's a pretty easy one to interpret. This represents a mystery that is shrouded, a spirituality that you can achieve if you are able to get there. The next cup has a snake. I love it when there's animals in cards, and I really love it when there's snakes in cards. There's a couple of cards that have snakes in them. And in this one, it represents two things with the snake. The snake can represent baseness, so crawling on the ground, being low, being sly, being sneaky little snake. Or it can also represent some of the Egyptian ideas of what the snakes often represented, which is shedding your skin, a transformation, becoming something new. So snakes have a positive and negative connotation. So let's talk about this one. And it's a little bit hard to see, but it's a castle on top of a tall tower. And it also has two meanings. So a castle on top of a tall tower or on top of a big rock can represent stability, the home, being grounded, having a life that is well lived and that is stable. Or up in a tower can represent arrogance or being separate from the real world, or isolating yourself, or being overly sheltered. So the next one looks like bubble tea or ice cream of the future, but it's actually jewels. What is the ice cream of the future? I can't remember what it's called. Dippin' Dots. It's a cup of Dippin' Dots. It's not really. So it's jewels, and they're sparkling and shining, and there's gold chains coming out of it. And this, of course, represents riches beyond your wildest dreams, right? Everything in here on this cloud is beyond your wildest dreams. So it can represent riches and wealth and, living a life of luxury. But there's also a warning there too, right? Materialism, becoming greedy, thinking only about the material and not thinking about the spiritual, focusing too much on work and ignoring your family or friends or social life. The next one, this one is really great. It has a wreath, a crown here, or a laurel. If you've ever heard the expression, don't rest on your laurels, which means don't, take your past glory and just kind of let that speak for itself and not do anything new. And that's what this is talking about. So it's talking about victory, success, winning. But this is the only cup on this card that has a design on the cup itself. And it's pretty hard to see, but if you want to Google Seven of Cups, Rider-Waite Smith, you'll see this one. It has a skull on the cup. And so laurel wreaths not only represent success and victory in the Olympics, in the ancient Greek Olympics, they would give a laurel wreath to the winners to crown them. Laurel wreaths also represent memoriam and death. So a lot of times you would get a laurel wreath on your body before you were burned in a funeral pyre, or they would lay laurel wreaths at your grave, like we lay flowers on graves in Western civilization. So that's kind of where that came from. So the laurel wreath and the skull kind of represents, are you being crowned for victory or are you being memorialized in death? And you need to think about both of those things and how you're going to balance them. And finally, we have this super spooky gargoyle dragon guy, which I really love. There's connotations in Anglo-Saxon, Scottish, British lore about dragons being these terrible, scary monsters. Slaying a dragon, I think it was Saint Christopher that slayed a dragon in English folklore. So there's this dragon, which is representing monsters and scary things, and just becoming something horrible or being defeated by the forces of magic or the forces of the world that are out there, ghosts and goblins and scary bad things. But dragons also are representative of good luck, especially in Eastern culture. Dragons have a really different meaning. And so that's kind of where this one's coming from as well, is that those dragons, you can be afraid of them or you can use them as part of your luck story and part of what guides you away or towards the good or right or bad things, good things or bad things. So let's go over this card in terms of from a divination perspective, if you get it. So this is, again, the Seven of Cups. It's from the Pamela Coleman Smith designed Rider-Waite deck. We have our 7 cups, and they each contain things that can kind of go either way. The meaning of this card is typically, don't be distracted by your imagination, and don't let your hubris or attention to wealth or focus on beauty or your base nature overtake you. See all of the good and positive things in the situation around you and choose the lighter path that's more spiritually enlightened, that's more positive, that takes you in a direction that makes you feel good instead of a direction that makes you feel bad. There's a lot of vice warnings in tarot cards. There's a lot of warnings about choosing negative, evil, toxic, bad things and why you shouldn't do that. So this card has a big, big message about that, about choosing wisely. And there's also a message here about not getting distracted by things that aren't real. Getting your heart set on something. I'm sure you've had a conversation with a person who's just, they're definitely going to do this, and this is what's got to happen, and I can't wait, and I'm so focused on it. Well, if they're not putting in the work to materialize that, then these are all just visions. And that's a big message of this card too, is that it's got a lot of vision, there's a lot of imagination, but none of these things are really real until you manifest them and you focus on them and you make them out of the clouds onto the ground. As we saw in our Don Draper is a jerk 4 of Cups, these cups are on the ground. And so this cup that's being offered, this guy's getting offered a lot of cups, and he's got to make a lot of choices because you want your cups upright on the ground and full. And this is not what's happening in this card. So I think that that's all that I will do for this video. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to see some posts about tarot cards, or on Twitter. And I'll probably come back a little bit later and talk about some other spooky stuff. Thanks, everyone.